One of the things in terms of whistleblower legislation, and this is very common throughout the world, particularly in the United States, is that it protects persons with information. And it really ensures that they're insulated against victimization or against penalties for coming forward and essentially whistleblowing and bringing to light information of governmental wrongdoing. So the idea with whistleblowers legislation is nothing new. In some cases, there's a financial incentive for persons who are whistleblowers. You actually get a percentage of the money that people or the government can recover as a result of investigations of illicit government activity. But the thrust of any legislation is to protect individuals who come forward. Sometimes people in certain countries who come forward and report acts of corruption suffer threats to their life. In some cases, they may be killed, they may lose their jobs, they may suffer repercussions. And so the major thrust of a legislation like this is to protect those persons from coming forward.
To recover public assets wrongfully acquired by public officials, GOB committed to a civil asset recovery bill. This bill also covers unexplained wealth by way of an unexplained wealth bill.
What are we talking about there, and why combine these two bills together?
It's an important point because I think that they need to have very strong criminal laws in relation to illicit gains from public officials. And I think when you target a civil asset recovery legislation and you tie that within the very important question of illicit gains by public officials, which is really an illegal activity that people should go to jail for, I think to a certain extent it diminishes the importance of what you're talking about. You really want to have a standalone legislation that deals with unjust enrichment and that says very plainly that any person who acquires wealth that cannot be explained, they would suffer penal consequences, including that they could go to jail. So there has to be a civil recovery element of that. But first and foremost, you want there to be a very strong deterrent for corrupt activities. So that strong deterrent is that you go to jail. You have no right to the asset anyway. But what would really make it so that people do not even think about illegally touching public funds or misappropriating public funds is the risk of imprisonment and serious penalties that would attach to that. So I do believe that one of the things that you rightly mentioned in terms of the combining of the legislation itself in one vein, I'm not saying that I have that view, but it may weaken what you're talking about because you want very strong criminal penalties.
Campaign finance reform became a leading conversation months before the 2020 general elections.
Right now, if I wanted to look at any of the campaigns in the United States, I could go on a website and I could know how much Donald Trump raised in the last election for president in the US, how much Joe Biden raised. I could know how much Hillary Clinton raised. I remember at one time I actually looked at the system in the United States, and one of the things that I was surprised about is how much money they spend on pizza. Because when you are in a campaign election, you tend to feed a lot of volunteers and they buy a lot of pizza, millions and millions of dollars. But that's a very transparent and a very robust system. And that's something that we need to adopt here in Belize, so that this is one of the areas of transparency legislation, that you will make it publicly aware, you make the public aware as it relates to how much money political parties and their agents are collecting and the candidates themselves, so that we would not have instances of Left Derman or other individuals who are giving significant amount of money to individual candidates, and that money is being kept secret. The idea here is that elections should be dictated by the vote. And if you have an individual who is allowed to give one political candidate $50,000, $100,000, $1 million, clearly that person will have an undue influence in the political process.
Reporting for News 5, I am Paul Lopez.